Hello and welcome to the Storyboard Show, the show where we talk about storytelling and then ask ourselves, what can that teach us about business? I'm John Gilbert.
I'm Iain Thompson.
And today we are going to be talking about a short film that we made fairly recently, just to take you through the process, because I think sometimes as a viewer, you consume a piece of media and don't necessarily appreciate the work that goes behind it and so on as well. And a lot of the films that we produce they're hard hitting. They've got a social message, and we're trying to challenge the audience's attitude to things, help people to be safer, help people to look out for each other. And one of the campaigns that we've done a lot of that work on is something called Not in Our Community, which we've talked about before. Now, recently we put out a film called Tori, and it's been quite well received. And we thought it might be worth just talking about the different steps from there. Okay. Now, in terms of our production as a team, a lot of the work that I've done was at the front end, really, and then handing over to Iain in terms of...
Who wrote this one?
So that's an interesting point about it. So the reason Tori's Story was created was we were contacted through one of the social media channels that we run through Not in Our Community by a survivor.
Just to be clear as well, sorry, just before you go on, just to be clear for people so they understand as well, there's two companies involved in this as well, wasn't there? So Eskimo Soup are running the campaign Not in Our Community, which is a marketing company. And then the Storyboard Media, which is the media company, made the film. Both companies worked hand in hand and very closely as well. But just to sort of make it clear when we're talking about the processes.
So as you said, Eskimo Soup has been working on this project for its fifth year now. We do it on behalf of the High Sheriff's Tribune Trust. But one of the things that we do is we run the social media accounts. And when a young person who has been through a serious ordeal, through whether that's been groomed for sexual exploitation or criminal exploitation, sometimes what they choose to do is share their story about what has been a pretty terrible experience for them, but in the hopes that something positive can come from this. And they tell their story, and the phrase I hear time and time again, if it just helps one person, then it's worthwhile what I'm going through at the moment. So this was a very moving tale, but it's quite typical really of that. And it's a young girl who'd been through an experience, contacted us. It's interesting that we can see that it's somebody who's followed Not in Our Community for a couple of years before she's chosen that she's right, now is the time I want to come and tell my story. So she shared that through Facebook Messenger, no face-to-face meetings, so it's a very delicate situation. She talks about the story of how she met this guy, he became a boyfriend, it was all good to begin with, but he became quite severely abusive over time.
What was quite shocking about this one as well was they were similar ages, weren't they, as well?
Yeah, so this isn't the case of like a creepy old guy and so on as well. This was somebody who was very controlling, and again it's very unpleasant really what happened to her, and that's an understatement.
Yeah,
it's horrible. What happened to her as well. She was raped, she was tortured, she was controlled by this guy, and she did in this scenario go to speak to one of her friends, who then went with her to the police. And the perpetrator involved in this he did actually admit it quite quickly, and therefore he was convicted and has been deported from the country basically. So that was the really brief outline of the story. And then what we do from Eskimo Soup's perspective is take those lessons and put together a short script. So it's a short 5-minute film that talks about her experiences and make sure that the key learning points are in there, like any of the earlier signs that this was becoming a controlling relationship, the importance of the friend and being able to speak to your friends about what's going on. And in this case, the friend was the person who instigated involving the police. So there's something to learn there. There's a message for you as well as a shocking story as well. So we make sure there's an educational element to it. So once that script everybody's happy with it, at that point we've handed it over to you in the storyboard capacity to make this as a film. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that? So there's a lot of responsibility involved in telling somebody's story in a delicate way. It is shocking, but as we say, the challenge that you have as a filmmaker is not to frighten the audience. They've got to take something positive away from that, so it's actually going to help people.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting what you're just saying as well about how you've got to be really conscious that the script's got everything in there about what people need to learn, what signs they need to look out for, what they need to do if they know of someone or if they themselves have been groomed or exploited or whatever. But also, you've got to keep people watching the film. You could just put a PowerPoint presentation out there of all the signs and things like that, but no one's going to look at it. So, but then I think there's a really fine line between keeping it, I don't want to say exciting, but keeping it interesting and engaging. Keeping it engaging.
Care about the characters and what's going to happen. Otherwise,
and so that you want to keep watching it, and that's sort of twofold as well. You want the audience to keep watching it, but you also want to do right by the person whose story it is as well and tell their story. But you don't want to make it gratuitous as well. And I think that's really difficult because, like you say, you've got things like those early signs. You've got things like what do they do and what did she do and what happened after that. But then you've also got the actual act of showing what happened. And I think that's the bit where you've really got to be careful, because that bit, it's not necessarily needed. Certainly it's not needed in loads of detail, but sort of that tells the story, so it's got to be there. And I think that's the bit where you've got to make sure that you want to keep it, particularly with this one, because
we've got a decision to make, that if the young person who has come forward who says, I was raped, I was burnt by cigarettes, I was raped again, it's like, do we make the decision to say, this is getting a bit too dark, we can't use that, but then we don't want to dilute the story. I think but without being gratuitous. And so you the choice of shots and the way you do that, I think addresses it really well in Tori. So we know what's happened.
I think it's an artistic decision, but I also think it's like a decision of how much do you want to show as well. So I think there's a way up there sort of to and with this one we decided to make it quite hard hitting. And like you say, like it was a shot type as well. We've got the scene where Tori is literally dragged upstairs and taken into a bedroom, and where he rapes her. And at that point, we thought long and hard about how to do this as well, because it's mentioned in the script and in the story about how she was effectively tortured, wasn't she? She was burnt with cigarettes. She was
locked in a room.
And so we sort of thought long and hard about how to do this. We decided to do it with a lot of sound. And then some shots afterwards as well, and the makeup, which was done by Viv Blackledge, which was brilliant. And that's how we sort of showed it, because we figured like the makeup and what we're showing there is going to be actually quite shocking. The sound also is going to be quite shocking, but we don't have to show people what's going on.
But there would be no benefits.
No, there'd be no benefit. It would be just gratuitous.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in order to keep it hard hitting, we thought we don't just want to skirt over the fact of like dragged upstairs and then we cut to afterwards and it's like, oh, what happened there? Or I think it sort of like balances that out quite nicely. Yeah, and I think that was one of the really big things that we spoke to quite a lot of your team about as well, before we came to the decision.
Yeah, I must admit, it's one of those films where I was a bit concerned about have we pushed this too far. But what we do in this case is we test run it with audiences.
I think that's a really important bit as well.
I mean, it's amazing how many times people don't do that.
Yeah.
But we will do that. And if you think about it, if young people say, well, how do you feel about that film? Oh, it made me sad and I don't ever want to think about it. We've missed our mark. If it's just like, it's shocking to think that things like this happen, but they were able to learn from that and pick up the key points, and they will tell us that it's appropriate for an audience. That effectively gives us license to use it.
I think similarly to which we spoke about in a previous Storyboard Show episode as well, where we're talking about when you're interviewing people that you've got to speak to them first, you've got to get to know them, you've got to learn what they want to talk about, what they don't want to talk about. I think that process afterwards is equally as important when you're talking about, when you're asking young people, you're asking viewers, how is this working? Is it, is it too much? Does it go far enough? Does it get the point across? Does it get those pointers that you've got to be looking out for across well?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll link to Tori's story in the notes below. It does come with a warning that there are scenes in there, what we've just discussed.
Some people are going to find
it distressing because it is based on real life. But in terms of reception for that film, it's been positive. We've had a lot of views, and it was shared by the local press for us, and that in itself through Facebook, the comments from people, it's possibly our most shared film.
Yeah. And
what people have really picked up on is the courage of Tori, not her real name, but in what she went through and her ability to share that story. So it's quite. I think for us, it's to know that something positive is happening from this. So different tone for the Storyboard Show for us today compared to some other episodes. Please do watch Tori's story with that caveat that I've already given you there. And I've been John Gilbert.
I've been Iain Thompson.
And this has been the Storyboard Show.